I'm very obsessed with my work and I do a lot of rewrites. There's been times where I haven't had time to do those rewrites, but for the most part, I do a lot of rewrites, figuring out the structure, the flow, how to make it flow so that when you have a surprise or you don't know something, you don't see it coming. I don't want to start presenting too many hints before that. So I really focus a lot, not just on the content, but on the way that I tell the story behind the content.
Welcome to Unspoken Security, the raw and gritty podcast for security professionals who are looking to understand the most important issues related to making the world a safer place, including intelligence-driven security, risks and threats in the digital and physical world, and discussions related to corporate culture, leadership, and how world events impact all of us on and off our keyboards. In each episode, host AJ Nash engages with a range of industry experts to dissect current trends, share practical insights, and address the blunt truths surrounding all aspects of the security industry.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Unspoken Security. I'm your host, AJ Nash. I spent 19 years in the intelligence community, mostly at NSA, and I've been building and maturing intelligence programs in the private sector for about 9 years now. I'm passionate about intelligence, security, public speaking, mentoring, and teaching. I also have a master's degree in organizational leadership from Gonzaga University, go Zags, and I continue to be deeply committed to servant leadership. Now, this podcast brings all of these elements together with some incredible guests to have authentic, unfiltered conversations on a wide range of challenging topics. This is not your typical polished podcast. My dog makes occasional appearances, although she's not around today. We'll see what happens. People argue and debate. We even swear here. I certainly do. And that's all okay. I want you to think of this podcast as a conversation, much like one you might hear at a bar after a long day at any one of the larger cybersecurity conferences that we all attend. These are the conversations we usually have when nobody's listening. Now, today, I'm joined by my good friend, Jon DiMaggio. Jon is currently the Chief Security Strategist at Analyst One and a cybercrime hunter who doesn't just follow ransomware gangs, he infiltrates them. He's a former U.S. intelligence analyst with a background in signals intelligence, which we have in common, of course. He spent his career going deep undercover inside some of the world's most dangerous cybercrime syndicates. This is where he and I differ. He also has an investigative series, The Ransomware Diaries, which exposed LockBit's inner workings, and it earned him widespread recognition. Beyond that, he's the author of The Art of Cyber Warfare, a 2-time SANS Difference Makers Award winner. He's appeared on 60 Minutes and been featured in the New York Times, Wired, and Bloomberg, and he's a regular speaker at all of the major security conferences. But clearly, this is going to be the peak of his public appearances, as you can tell by that list. So, Jon, anything you want to add to all that?
You did a pretty good job, AJ. Thank you for the wonderful intro, and thank you for having me today.
No problem, man. I'm glad to have you here. What I didn't mention there, Jon and I have worked together before. Previously, we come out of the same agency. We've worked together in private sector and actually spoke together at RSA. Jon was on a panel that I moderated at one point. So I'm thrilled you were able to make the time, man. I really appreciate it. Your whole career has sort of just blown up since those days. You're a big rock star now. So thanks for finding the time to chat with me. And so today the discussion, we're going to talk about, the title is Know Your Enemy, Know Yourself, right? So, capitalizing on some of the things we just talked about in your background, about going undercover, for lack of a better word, going into these ransomware gangs and infiltrating them. And I know you've made some friends along the way, I'm sure there's all sorts of foreign assets that are really excited about you. But I kind of want to get off to a start here and say, okay, if you're going to do all these things, like, let's go to the very beginning. Like, how do you start an investigation from scratch? What's the first steps? What do you do to get going?
Yeah. So, before you do anything, honestly, the most important part of research, especially research where you're going to engage with criminal adversaries, is to do your homework. You need to profile them. You have to figure out where they live, where they spend their time. And I don't mean like the adversarial infrastructure, which of course you need to know and be aware of that as well. But I'm talking about like the forums or social media places, whether it's Telegram or some underground forum or dark web forum or whatever it might be. You need to know where they spend their time. So there's a lot of preparation, and that means not just profiling them, but profiling the people they work with, the people they buy attack resources from, but more importantly, the people they're friends with. And the reason that's important is you learn more about them, and you need to know what makes them tick. So you want to identify whether there's strong political beliefs, whether there's cultural, religious beliefs that they have, or what often really important is to identify who they don't like, who are their competition or adversaries. And then you have to figure out the approach. there's multiple ways to do that. But one of the most effective ways I found with a lot of criminals is playing on their ego. And again, sort of building a camaraderie based on who they don't like or who their adversaries are. So you have to put all this together, come up with a game plan, make sure you have the resources, like, for example, if there's a language barrier, that's something you need to figure out ahead of time. All of these are important. And whether you're going to do something covertly or overtly, I've done both, but most people don't do, overt engagements where you're directly communicating as yourself. I have, but my situation's a little bit different. But either way, both of them still require a lot of planning, understanding the person, what makes them tick, and then you actually do the engagements once you've done all your homework.
Okay, so that's a lot of background information that you got to go dig into these guys, right? And you mentioned a couple of things I want to kind of follow up on. Let's start with languages, right? So I'll say most cyber criminals they're not native English speakers, right? US is not the number one country for cybercrime. Not that we don't have our own, but if you're dealing with Russian or Romanian, or I could probably name a bunch of other countries, so nobody accuse me of picking on anybody. Pick an Eastern European language, I suppose, is a place to start. How do you manage that? Like, do you speak 28 languages? Do you have good translation software? Do you have a lot of friends who are linguists? Like, how are you managing through that?
You got to use the Duolingo app on your phone, man. No, I'm kidding. I do use that, but that's not for work.
For Duolingo. No. I wish I were a sponsor. I should. Right now, Duolingo, learn everything or something like that. Anyway, Go on, man.
No, but you do have to have a plan with that. I can tell you some of the things I've done, but one thing to keep in mind, at least, with the past 5 years, I've been doing a lot of work with, Russian underground crime, cybercrime. And the thing about that, especially with ransomware, is it's one of the very few attack vectors where victims always have to talk to their attacker. So most of them can at least speak in broken English. So, for example, what I did with LockBit when I began the covert part of the operation, I approached them speaking a language after doing my homework that I was pretty sure they didn't speak, which was German. And when they said I don't speak that, I was, well, we both speak a little broken English. Why don't we try and communicate like that?
You sneaky
that's
bastard!
Exactly what I did.
You sneaky bastard! You tricked them into leaving their
twice.
Language. You sneaky bastard! No wonder they don't like you.
Right.
That's brilliant, though. I mean, listen, I've been doing this a long time. I've been in the industry, forever. I'm old. That's still brilliant. Like, that's the thing I was like, oh, sure, of course you did that. Makes great sense, because a lot of people speak some English, so just pick something they don't speak either, and then find a middle ground. And that middle ground, of course, is actually your ground, because English is your language. But that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. Is that just a LockBit thing, or is that a common tactic you've done with other groups?
So I actually got that tactic from James Nivel. Nivel, I'm probably saying his last name incorrectly and bastardizing it, but he'll be upset. But, he's a former Recorded Future guy, brilliant pen tester, and he had done a bunch of work with Black Matter back in the day. And we were talking about this, before I started this, and he's the one who gave me the idea, and it was effective. So, just like, you have to have a good Rolodex of criminal entities to who know you or can vouch for you and things like that. You have to have the same resources with security researchers, because you're always going to need help along the way.
Yeah, it's a small industry, and I tell people a lot of times, like, you're going to make your reputation, and there's a lot of things that come with that, right? If you have a bad reputation, eventually you'll have a hard time finding a job. Nobody wants to work with an asshole. But also, good reputations. People want a team. Like, people want to help each other. Right? A good example, right? There's a lot of things I don't do well. There's a few things I do okay. But I know a lot of people who do a lot of things well, and I've convinced them that I'm a good guy. They're easy to trick, apparently. And so it's that teaming thing, right? Being able to work with other people. And that's an interesting thing in the industry, is we're all looking to do good things, most everybody at least. And so if you build that network, of colleagues and friends and, respected people who are like, hey, I do this, you do that. That's cool. We can team up. Bad guys do the same thing, right? I mean, they team up on things too. Somebody writes the code. Somebody, is better at, I don't know, getting into a system. Somebody's better at the egress process. Somebody's better at cash outs, whatever it might be, right? So we do the same thing on our side. But it's going back into the forums of discussion. So you mentioned in the case of LockBit, right? That, and we're not going to talk a ton about LockBit, because frankly, you talk a ton about LockBit already, and it's a cool topic. I'm just going to give you other things to talk about.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, no worries. But I mean, you talked about moving to English, right? Were you emulating a victim at that point, or? Because when you're emulating the bad guys, if you're trying to partner with these guys, if you're trying to get in these forums and try to partner, like, it seems like in my opinion, you'll tell me I'm wrong, less likely to work, right? So how do you do that? Or is it when you're investigating these groups and infiltrating, you're not trying to be infiltrating as a criminal, you're infiltrating as a victim?
Well, actually, I took a different take. I approached them as an upcoming eager hacker
Ooh.
who wanted to join their ransomware group. And this was back, 2021, maybe early 2022, can't remember,
Mhm.
but that's where I started doing this. And, they had posted, a bunch of things, recruiting, propaganda and things like that. So, and I was, again, talking with a lot of their their members, and again, people who are friends with them, not just working with them. So
Mm.
I came up with this plan. I knew I wasn't going to get all the way in, because at the end of the day, even if I did get in and they gave me access, you only have a certain amount of time where if you don't produce victims and gain a decent amount of money through extortion, they boot you out anyway. So I was doing it more just to, sounded like a fun idea at the time, and I wanted to see what I could learn and where it would take me.
It's nice to know that they have corporate KPIs you have to, to produce, right? Otherwise, we're not
That's
keeping
right.
you around. Like it's good to know that even in the criminal world, all comes back down to profit margins, right? Like, we're
Right.
not carrying you around. You got to make some money for us. So when you're doing this, like two things that come to mind. First, we talked about some of this prep work, right? So for this ruse that you put on of being a native German speaker and moving, are you building like the full persona, a full sock puppet? Like, how deep do you go, and how deep do they challenge you? Are they are you challenging physical locations, education, background? Like, how deep do you go, and how long does it take to build a really good persona that you think's virtually bulletproof? Is the first question, and then the next piece that goes along with that is the infrastructure to go with it. So if you're building this persona that says you're German, native German speaker, and you got to build all the things, the age and the gender and the location and the background, all this kind of stuff, right? I assume, and tell me I'm wrong, you have to build the infrastructure to go along with that, or something that at least emulates it in case they check, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they may want to know that. So how long does it take to do all that stuff?
Well, so depending on the operation, there's different answers. But for
Mm,
anything where I'm going to do like covert engagements, I built myself a template that basically has everything a real person would
mm,
have. I kind of shopped that around with some other folks that do the same type of work, make sure I didn't have any holes. And what I do is I just spend time creating those accounts, building out those profiles, building out
mm,
history and a backstory. What I do, or what I did, I don't have the same time today, but what
mm,
I did for several years was I would have 5 accounts going. I'd have 3 that were in development, and I'd have 2 that were operational. One would be a supporting account and or a backup account for if I lost access, to still have some sort of access into the group. And I would use that also to support that primary account. But it's a lot of work. It's constant development. But at the end of the day, that's what keeps you safe. So you have to put the work in for
mm,
that. It has to be believable, has to be a history, and there has to be, a lot of supporting accounts and details. So if they do check you out, it does look real.
mhm, mhm. And then what about the infrastructure? You're building a full virtual network? Are you using like virtual browser software, things like that? What are you doing?
No, that's a great question. So I used to build out my own virtual network. It's a lot of work. I
Mhm.
used to be an engineer, but that was like 20 years ago. I don't have the time or the patience for that. So I use a great resource. It's from a company called Authenticate, and they have a tool called Silo, and it's the and I don't get anything for saying this. It is the best resource for this type of work or any type of cybersecurity research that exists, because it keeps you safe. It takes care of, you have hop points all over the world.
Mm,
And it also, like, for example, on forums, if an administrator goes and looks at the logs, they can see that you're translating everything as you go. What Silo does is it does all that outside of the session and presents it back to you. So in other words, there's no log or trace of evidence to follow you to figure that stuff out. And who is the time to try and figure all that on their own? I know I don't.
mhm, mm. No, and for those who are listening, like, listen, I didn't know that was gonna be John's answer. I know that people are gonna go, "Wait a minute now, AJ works with these guys, at Authenticate, right?" I've been a
Oh,
user of their tool. I've used Silo for, like, 9 years.
but
For Oh, yeah, yeah, I'm it's one of the few tools, like, I've been in sales meetings and conversations while working for other companies. I'm like, "Oh, you gotta see this tool." Like,
yeah,
I love it, and I don't use it as often or as well as you do, frankly. But it was one of those things, it's the easy button to the dark web. So, but for anybody wondering, that wasn't intended to be a plug. John just
it
uses it, and that's
wasn't
just a
right.
convenience that I'm certain I will make sure that folks that authenticate hear about, because
Well,
they'll be happy to know.
the reason,
Because
if I
these,
could just interrupt real quick,
yeah.
the reason I plug it or talk about it, well, one, you asked me, but the reason that I don't mind mentioning them, because I don't normally mention vendors,
Mhm.
is because it is something that keeps people safe. And
Yep.
there's a lot of people who do this type of work who don't necessarily know what they're doing, or they're new at it and think they know what they're doing. And this will cover your ass a lot more than you trying to do it on your own.
Yeah, 100%. When I was introduced, I saw it briefly when I was still in the government space, but I really got a chance to play with it when I was in the bank. And because, we had some brilliant people, and I'm not an engineer, I can't build shit really. And we had this guy who built this dirty network, and it was, hopping and VPNs, all this stuff. And I was like, oh my God, this is a lot of work and a lot of energy, and it was slow. And so I was introduced to the tool, and I was like, all right, this just solves my problem. Like, this is, I don't need to worry about the engineering stuff. So anyway, we're not here to continue talking about it, but in case anybody's wondering, it is a very cool tool, and I'm happy to talk about it at length. And the CEO was just on a couple episodes ago. So,
Okay.
but the other question
Done
I
my
had,
homework.
besides the front end of, okay, all this research you have to do, which is a ton to build this persona, build these personas, these profiles, and obviously the engineering piece cut down because you use an app at this point, but in some cases people do build these big networks. But then you got the back end, right? You do all this work. Like, these projects sound like they take a long time to run out. And then, so how long can they take, or do they take? And then what do you do at the end? Like, how long does it take to put together reports? What kind of output do you have? And who does that go to? Besides writing books and doing public things to make yourself super famous and awesome, like, you're almost as cool as the Batman sign behind you at this point. But I mean, how long does it take to put all these things together? Like, what's the back end for all this stuff?
So that the first Ransomware Diaries, where I did the covert part of that operation, or the most of the covert part of the operation, that actually took about 6 months. Typically, though, it takes me about, I put out like 4 reports a year with the Ransomware Diaries, or I did, and so it's about once a quarter. But yeah, it takes a lot of time, and not a lot of employers, would be on board for that. And that's one thing where I'm glad that, the analyst, one, the company I worked for, was patient with me, because while everywhere I've worked, long form reports don't do well. My Ransomware Diaries, each volume is like, between 50 and 70 pages for the most part. But they trusted me, and that was a story. And I'm a storyteller. I love to make cyber work interesting, and not just have a report with IOCs and details. I want to tell the story. That's why I wanted to get to know the humans behind it. But doing that, it's had a ton of success, and it wouldn't have had that when I've written short blogs. They have not done well. So there's exceptions to everything, and when content's done well, I think even if it's lengthy, you can still have a lot of success with it. But they definitely take time, a ton of work. To answer your question about the writing phase, yeah, that definitely, honestly, that takes me anywhere from 1 to 2 months. I'm very obsessed with my work, and I do a lot of rewrites. There's been times where I haven't had time to do those rewrites, but for the most part, I do a lot of rewrites, figuring out the structure, the flow, how to make it flow so that when you have a surprise, or you don't know something, you don't see it coming. I don't want to start presenting too many hints before that. So I really focus a lot, not just on the content, but on the way that I tell the story behind the content.
Well, and that's interesting. And kudos to Analyst One's leadership, because, like you said, that's a challenge. Most organizations don't want to buy into that. They just want things quick, right? It's fast, and ROI, return on investment's a really big thing. And if you say, hey, I'm going to do this thing that's going to take months, and don't know for sure what we'll find, don't know what the output's going to be, it's hard to get somebody to see that strategically and say, oh, I trust you. This is going to be very cool. Let's do it. So, it's pretty awesome. Go ahead.
On that, with Ransomware Diaries 1, it's funny because I wanted more time. I was unhappy with it. They insisted, because that one I had spent so much more time than any other report on. And I had just come back. I had won the SANS Difference Makers Award for my book, and it was just before Christmas. And all I wanted to do was take some time off and relax and come back to this. And they were insistent that I finish it. And I was like, okay, well, I just won this award, and it was like, it's one of those things where you can sit and be like, oh, pat yourself on the back on how great it was. or you can just get back to work. So I was like, let me just do this. And we put it together and we got it out. But I remember the first person I shared it with was Dina over at Click Here, the podcast. And she's a former NPR reporter. And I'd sent it to her, and she came back to me and she said to me, "You have no idea what you have here. You're really underselling this." To me, it was, just another report that I'd written, right. and it ended up being what will probably be the best work I've ever done in my career. So
that's incredible. Well, and it sounds like you said, you didn't want to release it that soon. You wanted more time. And I have a hunch, not to speak for you, but I've seen this, and I've seen this a little with you as well. It's that whole, perfect is the enemy of good enough, right? And
yeah,
caring so much about the work and being so diligent, which is, what we're all raised to be in the agencies, frankly. You also get to the point where it's like, it's never good enough to publish, right? So sometimes it's nice to have somebody kick us and go, listen, it's got to get out the door, right? You can't continue to shuffle words forever. It's that balancing act. You don't want to rush it. Bad intel, rushed intel's bad intel, and you get bad results. But it's good in this case. It sounds like it was the right balance of you were in a good spot, and somebody had to push it a little bit. And as you said, it sounds like it's some of your best work, which is saying a lot at this point, frankly.
Well, thank you. And that brings up another good point. It all depends on what the work is for. I spent, 14 years in the intelligence community where everything has to be timely, quick. It's not about telling the story and having the layout, but at my current job, that's what, this is a different process. It's a different end result. It's a different audience. So that's the reason that with this, I'm different. When I'm writing something that's for intelligence purposes, that's about time, speed, and accuracy.
Yep.
So there is a difference. And you do, for people listening, you do have to, because I've worked with people that never make their deadlines, take forever. It all depends on the dynamic of what you're writing, the purpose of it, and where it's supposed to go. And obviously your handlers on when they expect something to be done. I think I've only missed a deadline at Analyst One once, but for the most part, I always try to make my deadlines. And it always involves me working like the month before, 7 days a week, crazy hours, because I obsess about my work. But that's on me. No one makes me do that. That's just me. It's just how I'm wired.
Yeah. And I get that. I mean, I'm also somebody, a lot of my stuff comes out of the last minute cramming. That has more to do with ADD and poor planning sometimes, but also it's a forced thing. And there's a lot of people in our industry who have, ADD or ADHD. And part of that is you don't perform well until you're forced to, and so I don't know if that applies to you necessarily in this case, but it applies to me a lot of times. So
I always perform well, AJ.
What's that?
I always perform well. I'm just kidding.
Look at you. That's well done. I'm gonna keep that in. That's gonna actually be the clip that I'm gonna use to promote this show. Jon DiMaggio, I always perform well. I'm actually gonna pull back. We did mic check before this all started, and John also went into the microphone and said, "I'm Batman." So I'm going to take that and I'm going to say, I'm going to put those together and we're going to have fun with that. But
I can't wait.
Maybe we can get it as like a mix. So listen, I want to move on to another, piece of this, another big topic when you talk about, the research and putting all these things together. And it's a bit of a shift, but we run into this a lot is attribution is a big challenge, right? So now, again, you're in these spaces. So in some cases, I'm sure it's less of a challenge as to which organization is involved because you're there, right? But it's really common that we run into challenges. I've seen a lot of it. I know you have too, of there's this rush to attribution. Who did this? And sometimes it's important to know. Like people ask, why do you care? Well, attribution matters if you want to know, what might happen next, what their motivations might be. There's a lot of reasons to want to know who did it. Some organizations like, I don't care, just stop it, just make it go away. And that's, are we likely to see it again? That may have to do with attribution as well. But there's also a lot of challenges with attribution. So I'm curious about your thoughts on how do you get to the point of attribution on adversaries when, it isn't direct access like this? And what do you see as a lot of common mistakes that others are making in this area?
Yeah, I am a stickler for attribution. I learned how to do it with an intelligence value. I was trained how to do it in the government. Transitioning to the private sector, I sort of learned how to apply it through cyber a little bit better. And in my book, I wrote a whole chapter on it with covering pitfalls and what to do and how to use case. And I'm going to answer your question, but in that use case, in my
you should hold up the book. Did you?
Which I should. Yeah, I don't have it right here in front of me, but yes, I should have. But in the book, I did a whole chapter and I had a use case. The use case was great for teaching because everything fit perfectly. But that's not what real world work usually is for attribution. So I got a paper coming out. My next one is on the 22nd of April, and it's about how to do evidence. It's the same model from the book, but how to do evidence-driven attribution, applying weight, making assessments, having a hypothesis, being able to defend that, all that stuff before you actually make attribution. The reason I spent, and then I do a use case with Black Cat, because there was a lot of people out there on social media, even in actual reports that were making comments about how Black Cat is this group or another group. And they would sort of take my word attribution, and that's becoming more and more popular. And it's a problem because you're not providing evidence. People get it wrong. Other people run with your attribution, and it's sort of a
Mhm.
snowball effect. And I have a big issue with it. I want you to be able to give me evidence if you're going to make that statement. Otherwise, it's your opinion, and qualify it as that. So, but the pitfalls that people make are just that, letting their human bias or their assumptions lead to attribution, not supporting
Mhm.
that attribution, or using either too little evidence or the incorrect type of evidence to make that assessment. And I'll give you an example. A lot of people with this Black Cat thing, a lot of people made attribution as to whether they rebranded or not based on a group having code overlap in their ransomware payload. And people are like, oh, Black Cat is, they rebranded into Ransom Hub. And then, about 4 months later, another group appeared, Cicada 3301.
Yep.
And magically, they also had a lot of source code overlap, even more so than Ransom Hub had. And people made attribution to that. Well, here's the thing. You should never make attribution, or rarely make attribution based off of sort of one vector of the diamond model, or one piece of evidence. You want to have a well-rounded, balanced attribution evidence to support that. So you want to have multiple vectors, and then you want to qualify it. You want to say, okay, I believe this this is low, medium, or high confidence. You want to put weight to each piece of evidence, and you want to have somebody besides yourself help to qualify that. And what I mean by that is you get too close to it. So what I do is I have my team, or when it comes to me, or with them, but for me with it, we'll sit down and I'll have somebody take the other side that I'm wrong and do their homework and try and poke holes in it. And if I
Mhm.
can't defend it and support what I'm saying with the evidence, then we don't go with it, or we'll give it a lower confidence rating. So if something has a low or medium confidence rating, often I won't go public with it, but internally I'll put that assessment there and we can continue to work it. Sometimes I'll say publicly, okay, I believe this with medium confidence and here's why. But if I have high confidence, that's where I go with it and I run with it. But again, you'll not see me, at least not very often. I'm sure I've made some mistakes out there, but not very often will you just see me say, oh, such and such is this group, without providing evidence, with those exceptions where obviously where it's, the group has said that they did it. They've got they provided the evidence. They have the data. You've checked it's not out there. There's samples of it. You can validate it. The victim may or may not
Mhm.
have acknowledged that this is it. Those are those situations where it's a little bit easier. But when it comes to something where someone's trying to deceive you and they don't want you to know about it, like rebranding, for example, it's not going to be that easy.
Well, and it's good. You made a lot of great points, and a lot of them that I mean, I'm sitting here smiling because it reminds me of, the old days. Like for those who don't know the diamond model, it goes back a long ways. Kind of gives away how old we are. I remember, like, diamond model was created at the agency. I was there when it was being authored, and the purpose of the diamond model, which I'm going to try to remember the four sides of the diamond model now. I know infrastructure was one. What was it?
Infrastructure and malware.
Yeah,
Yeah.
malware. There's a couple others. I'll look it up. I'll figure it out. Somebody will figure it out. But
Yeah, there's
the
lots of
reason we
links
came
out.
up with it at the time was because this was we were trying to explain to leaders, to executives, how all this gets done, and put it in a visual form, but also some justification of saying why attribution, how to do attribution, why it's done this way, et cetera. And you had to have multiple points. It gave you better confidence, as you said, confidence rating straight out of intelligence community directives. Low confidence, maybe is kind of. I mean, there's statistics to it. Moderate, medium confidence, more likely than not, 50-50, that kind of a thing. But it was putting that out there, and I think one of the challenges that I've seen, at least, is in the private sector. Listen, there are a lot of people who came out of the government space to the private sector. They were born and raised and trained in this stuff for years and years and years. And I'm not saying that you can't be an intelligence professional if you didn't go through that process. But I am saying if you did nothing, if you were nothing intelligence related, to be clear, if you were an incident responder and maybe a great one, you're not suddenly an intel person, right? There's processes and standards and procedures, and it's easy to fall into those traps because every junior intel person did. That's why we were trained out of that stuff.
Yeah.
And even if you get, the SANS course, which is a really, really good course, it doesn't give you the experience. It doesn't give you that knowledge, that background. It doesn't give you the humility, frankly, to have been in a bad position. So you realize, hey, I got to peer review this. You got to have somebody set up, like you said, the challenge. It's, one of the analytic techniques to have somebody take the opposite position and try to push as far as they can there and see if they poke holes in it that you might not have seen because you're so close to it that you have that bias, even if you're trying not to. You've come to believe this is something, right? And
Yep.
those are things that you only experience through a lot of effort, through a lot of training. And also, like I said, the humility of being wrong and being so
Right.
determined to say it was definitely this. And then somebody proves it's not. And you're like, oh, it's terrible. But I fear that part of it is, like I said, part of it is people that have intelligence titles, but weren't put through these processes. And it's not necessarily their fault. Companies said, hey, I want to go into Intel. And suddenly they took a team and said, you're the Intel team now. That's not quite how it works. But also this push, sometimes in the vendor space, I suppose, or sometimes through marketing of wanting to have the big splashy thing, right? I've worked with marketing teams and I've written stuff and they go, hey, can we get rid of this low confidence thing and just say it's that? I'm like, no, you can't. You can't do that. There's a
Right.
reason. Well, low confidence isn't really flashy. It's not a good marketing piece. I'm like, well, then don't publish it because it's low confidence for these reasons. You have to educate
Right.
people. The confidence matters, right? But it's challenging, I think, because you see people that either are misattributing things and they don't have enough evidence, as you pointed out, and they're either doing it because they don't have the experience and the knowledge, or worse yet, it's intentional. Like somebody's told them to do it. It's for marketing purposes. It draws attention.
Yes.
And it's sad because, as you said, it snowballs. We're at a point now where that gets
Yes.
out and somebody else echoes it and repeats it. And next thing you know, you got hundreds of people saying it. And now it's circular reporting that people are saying, well, that supports it. Well, this guy says so too. And it all came back to the same thing. It all came back to one flawed assessment based on one piece of evidence. Recycled code is far from conclusive. Bad
Yeah.
guys are great recyclers. They do more
Yes.
recycling than I do at the house for sure. So like it's a terrible way to decide this must be them, right? It could be, but must be is
Well,
a far away from that. So
y-
it
you hit
frustrates me, man. Go ahead.
you hit on a point there. When I spent years trying to get my book published, and I really wanted to go with a big publisher. And when I began talking to No Starch Press about doing this book, I remember when I just had an outline at that point and I had a sample chapter, but I remember having a discussion about the publisher said to me, you want to have an entire chapter about attribution? And I was like, absolutely.
Mhm.
And I just remember having to explain to them almost like this conversation, but what you just said to me, not everybody comes from an intelligence background. But on top of that, through all the many years of experience now, I altered sort of that process and I made it more applicable to be used in the private sector. And that's why I wrote that whole chapter, is so that there would be a resource out there that tells you how to do this sort of, analytically driven attribution, because it didn't exist. You're right. And I think that's one of the reasons the book is done as well as it has.
Yeah, and that's a service to the whole community. And if anybody hasn't seen it and you don't have the Intel background, please read it. Please understand, I'm not trying to insult people. I realize, and I'm also not trying to be a gatekeeper. I realize I get passionate sometimes about if you're not an Intel pro, don't lead Intel teams, et cetera.
Right.
I'm not saying that these are things that can't be learned. They can. Like I know lots of
Absolutely.
people in the Intel community that aren't special or brilliant, myself included, frankly. But we were in it. Like we learned it. We went through years and years of school and training, a lot of times through the military or whatever it is. And it is a set of, it's Liam Neeson, a certain special set of skills or whatever. But it is, there's something to it. I think a lot of people have lost that or didn't know to begin with. They think, well, Intel is just smart people using Google. And that's sometimes true, but a lot of times there's a lot more to it. And you get into structured analytic techniques, and you start talking about intelligence community directives, and you start talking about JP 2-0. And people go, well, I don't know any of these things. Well, that's because you're not an Intel pro. I mean, don't feel bad. I'm not trying to insult anybody. I'm not an incident responder. I'm not a malware analyst. There's a lot of things that I don't do. I think it's important that people understand the difference. And it's great that you have, this book is one of these good resources where people go, okay, I get it. I can learn these nuances, and then teaming with other people, as you said, which is always good advice. I don't know anybody who's good at this job who doesn't do that. I don't care how long you've been doing it. I've been doing it for 20 some odd years, whatever it is now. I'm old. You got to have somebody. You got to have somebody to peer review.
Yeah.
You got to have somebody to team up with, somebody to challenge you, somebody you
Yes.
respect to challenge you. The best Intel teams I worked on, there were fights, like not physical, but there were arguments and passionate fights. And you're like, well,
There are.
okay, you need that, right? I mean, that's how you find
do.
out what's real, because this shit matters.
And it's better to do that. And if you're right, some people do get upset about things like that because they're so close to it. But it's much better to have that bad day in the office with your peers than on a very public level where the whole community sees it and you're proven wrong there. That's a lot worse. I remember, so my book hadn't come out yet. It was getting ready to come out, and he's a good friend now, Will Thomas. He goes by Bashudo Token on X. But even after everything I just said, I had put something out there without just human bias. I had said this group is X, and it did it. I mean, it ended up being accurate, but I didn't do all the things I just said to do. And he, again, was a public level, and I didn't know him then. He challenged me, and he kind of backed me back down. And I went to him offline, and I was like, "Hey, man, I thank you for doing that. I am a stickler for attribution, and I literally did what I always tell other people not to do." And we
Mhm.
became really good friends after that. But it can happen to anybody. Again, it's just you have a bias, you don't even know it. It's so easy to say that group A is actually group B, and you might be right, you might not be, but if you don't
Mhm.
provide the evidence, other people shouldn't use that as attribution, and you should get in the habit of not doing that.
Well, and you hit it on the head. I mean, that was the big piece, is that you had the humility. Like, we see this all the time on social media, whether it's our work or anything else. People having a position, it's not a supported position, and then you challenge them, and they just dig in and throw a bunch of slurs at you or whatever it is, right? They get and I'm a sucker. I admit it. I should stop being on social media because again, it's ingrained as an intel person. Somebody has something, and I'm like, well, there's no logic to this conclusion. I should just go, yeah, there's no logic, and move on, because they don't want to hear it anyway, I'm sure.
Right.
But sometimes I jump in like, well, hold on a second. What about this? And then suddenly I'm, accused of a lot of things. Some people have the humility, but most don't. And I guess it's, I've been doing this so long. Like I said, you have some of those bad days in the office, but everybody also understood we were all on the same side. It's all to get to the right answer. If I ask you a challenging question, it isn't meant to be personal. I'm not trying to challenge you. I'm trying to get to the thinking. And I've also found, by the way, I don't know if you have, I'm sure others in the industry have at least, it's not always well received by friends and family as a way to live. Sometimes people do get tired of that shit. And they're
Yeah.
like, why is he constantly questioning me? I'm like, I'm not questioning you. I think there's a lot of pieces missing of this. Help me understand why you believe this, or why I should
Yeah.
believe this, because you do it so long, it becomes who you are, right? It's ingrained, it's a habit. It is not necessarily the greatest way to win friends and influence people. So I found you kind of have to massage that in the rest of your life. Be like, temper how you ask these questions. But it's very hard to just accept things at face value, and it's hard to watch other people do it.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you've seen some of the same stuff.
Well, you got to check your ego at the door as well.
Mm.
I mean, I don't care how long you've been around. I don't care how good you are. There is going to be somebody, regardless of their experience, that's going to be able to teach you something. And it's when you put your ego above that that you stop learning. And it's also where you make the biggest mistakes. And that's
Mhm.
very difficult to do, but it is very important to remember that we're all human, we all make mistakes, and none of us are perfect. And to get back off that ledge. You're not the greatest out there. There's always going to be somebody smarter that sees things differently, and it can provide an angle or a view that you didn't even think of.
Yeah, usually it's you, but who's the
It's not
smarter
always
guy?
me, trust me.
Usually it's you, but no, I'm with you. So we've sort of leaned into the last question I wanted to ask on this topic. But we've already started, but I'm curious other thoughts on it. So you've been doing this a long time, like I said, we both have at this point, and so you've seen a lot, you've done a lot, you've done a lot of really amazing things. But what do you see as like the hardest part of doing the kind of work you do that people may not realize?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. For one, when you're doing work with that involve engaging actual human beings, regardless of them being criminals or not,
Mhm.
there's two things. One, it takes a lot out of you. There's no 9 to 5. There's no taking off on the weekend. There's no taking your vacation and just leaving work. I don't know how many vacations I've had to bring my research laptop and do work because I'm pretending to be somebody
Who's not
that
on vacation? The
that's
fictional
right.
person hasn't taken a
That's right.
vacation.
And they're in a different time zone, and I have to be
Mhm.
available at certain times. And you've worked so hard to get there. You can't throw it away because you want to go chill at the beach with your family or your friends.
Mhm.
But and it's a lot of late hours. And then you've got your regular corporate duties on top of that. And what ends up happening is burnout, especially
Right.
because a lot of companies don't understand what goes into doing that type of work and the toll that it takes. In addition to the time and the resource toll, the other aspect is, and this is something I really have struggled with, is sometimes, there's bad, well, let me just preface it with this. There's two types of criminals out there. There's the ones that are just born bad. They're just bad human beings. And there's the others that have good in them and made poor decisions and chosen the wrong path. And some of those people are likable. And if they weren't criminals and you just met them under different circumstances, you'd become friends with them. And I have become friends with some of these guys. That does not stop me from doing my job, but it is hard, when you've made a relationship with somebody, you do have an understanding of them. And, then I got to go write a report where, I'm making their lives a lot harder. I've written reports where after the fact they've been like, why did you do that? The FSB came to talk to me today, or people know who I am now, or things like that. And it makes it really hard because, I'm a human being. And again, when you actually get to know some of these people, you can't control who you like or you don't like. You can
Mhm.
control how you feel. You can't control. You can only control what you do with that information. And the day that I either stop doing my job or I don't do the right thing because of any influence or feelings I have will be when I stop doing this type of work. But I've always done what I need to do. But yeah, there's times where I felt bad. The other aspect is you get something with other people, the really bad ones, you can't tell them oh, I don't like what you just said. And I'll give you an example. A lot of what the Russian bad guys are really racist. They're also very homophobic. And there'll be times where they'll say things and it definitely bothers me. But if I
Mhm.
were to say, hey man, what the fuck is your problem? What is this? Like, the 1920s? Like who thinks like that? And what is being hateful how is that gonna help you? What did this person do to you? I can't
Mhm.
say any of those things. And over time, seeing the crimes, and again, pretending that you're one of them, you just feel like crap. You feel like a
Mhm.
horrible human being. And again, you just get to where it's hard to get up and do your job every day. For the first time in my career, I took off like 6 weeks last year,
Mhm.
and I was just at a point where I was just so burnt out. It was just, I mean, mentally, physically, I couldn't do it anymore, and I just needed a break from all of it. And fortunately, this 2-year LockBit thing had come to a close, and I was able to do that. But if it hadn't, I would have had to keep going. And again, a lot of employers don't get that, and that's where it's really tough with this job. High burnout rate for sure when you do engagements with human beings that are that are
Mhm.
that are bad guys.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's hard on the family, obviously, too. Then, right? So you're buried, you're doing work. Like I remember going back to Intel days. It's some similarities, right? You can't tell people what you're doing necessarily. They have to trust you. If you have a relationship where somebody doesn't trust you, if you're working late, at least you work from home now, which probably helps. But it was worse when you weren't. But if you have to work late hours or odd hours, maybe they don't trust the activities you're online, etc. It can really play havoc on relationships, family, friends, etc. And there's a secretiveness that's required, so there's a trust factor there. So and then what you're exposed to, as you said, there's lasting effects to some of that. Some things in intel, you get exposed to some just horrible things, whether it's attitudes, whether it's words, whether it's visuals. There's some terrible things in the world that really eat away. And I know lots of people who do really well to take advantage of support systems, therapy, and other things where they have outlets that they use, as opposed to just staying on the computer all the time. But a key piece that we didn't talk about yet that I kind of want to hint on, but again, only
Can I say
as you're
something real quick
comfortable.
before you jump?
Mhm.
Let me
Yeah.
ask
Yeah,
one
yeah,
more
yeah.
thing?
Yeah.
Though it's older, one of the best portrayals of what I just said about doing all
Mhm.
this human stuff and pretending to be somebody else is, especially when you do it for a long period of time, all day, every day. If you remember the movie Donnie Brasco,
Yep. I was thinking that.
guy acts, he's pretending to be a gangster, gets in with these
Mhm.
guys, lives and breathes it, and when he comes out, he struggles and he still acts like a gangster. That, not the gangster part, but
Mhm.
whoever you're trying, like, that literally happens where you've made yourself this person and you start to become that, and you start to adapt a lot of these traits that aren't good. And it's because you're consumed by it, and that movie
Mhm.
portrays it really well in the effect that it has on you and the real you, and how it can change you and make you become somebody you don't want to be. And I don't mean committing crimes. I mean your personality, your home life,
Mhm.
the way that you act, your friends, like it can change you.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I know in like the human circles and law enforcement, I think also uses it, but we used to talk about going native, right? Where you do get to a point where you lose yourself. And sometimes it even includes like committing crimes and doing things that aren't even authorized as part of the work, right? And you just lose yourself, right? You get so enmeshed. Yeah, it can be really, really challenging. I know there's a lot of work that goes that's why human agents have handlers. That's why undercover agents have handlers. Somebody you have to check in with occasionally to make sure you don't go over the edge. The human psyche is not bulletproof, and you can find yourself going bad places. So
And
I mean,
that's the
that's a really
problem
good
is I
point.
don't have that. It's just me. I'm the only one in my company who does this. I don't know many. I do know people who do it, but I don't know a lot of people who do this work. So
Hmm.
I don't
Hmm.
have that. And that was one of the things I had to kind of learn through the experience is I needed to find people who I could talk to and vent to. And I do have a good circle of people from government agencies as well as the private
Hmm.
sector who do similar types of work for a different outcome, not necessarily to infiltrate a ransomware group, but they spend their
Hmm.
days talking to criminals, whether it's buying malware or data or whatever it might be. but I have those people to bounce things off of now, but I didn't for a long time. And that's also important to have that outlet as well.
Yeah, it's a good point. You can feel free to add, man. And we're on Signal. We chat occasionally. Like if you need somebody, nobody else is available. Like
I
I
appreciate
can do
that.
that for you as well, man. I mean, we're in the same circles. So
I
one
appreciate
thing I
that.
did want to ask, and again, this one, it's up to you as to how much you answer, because this, I don't want to put you at risk. I don't want you to put yourself at risk. Not you would for me. But what about the far end of the sketch? When we talk about, the things people don't think about, the dangers with this job. What about just straight up threats, to you from adversaries? We've talked about obfuscation. You talked about all the things you do to keep yourself safe, et cetera. But eventually you go public with these things. So as much as you did all that, LockBit's well aware that you exist. Like
Yeah,
these guys know who you
absolutely.
are, and these guys are criminals, and there's a lot that goes with that. So, do you want to talk, and you don't have to if
Yeah,
you don't, but do you
sure.
want to talk at all about
No,
how that impacts you, how you mitigate that, how you deal with those kind of things?
yeah, I'm willing to talk about it because I think it's important for people
Mhm.
to understand, especially people who want to kind of go this direction within the field. The Lockbits one's a good example because that's one that's I've written, it's public, but there are even more crazy stories that are not public on similar things that I've done. But with the Lockbit one specifically, when things kind of took a turn there towards the end, when Lockbit, well, first off, when I wrote the Ransomware Diaries, they started using my avatar. That's been talked about a lot already, but that's kind of an oh shit moment when you see a bad guy on a forum and your face is there, and
Hmm.
then they're getting in arguments with other ransomware crews and they're staring at your face. At some point, these guys are like, "What the fuck is this guy staring at me?" But the thing about it is when the St. Anthony's Hospital breach happened, and I was very close with the leader of Lockbit, and I was naive. I honestly believed because previously he had hit this hospital called Sick Kids, which was a cancer hospital for children. He not initially, but eventually he gave them the decryption key for free so they could
Hmm.
get their systems back online. I believed I could get him to do the same thing, and he had he had no empathy. He didn't care. He All he wanted was the money and didn't care that he was hurting children. And I got so upset, and it led to my falling out. But once, and I started going after him, trying to figure out who he was. I started working with law enforcement, the FBI, NCA. It wasn't known as this at the time, but what's known today as Operation Chronos.
Hmm.
And I was putting myself on the line a lot more to try and get Lockbit. At that point, I wanted to figure out who he was. I wanted to help with get him indicted, and as well as some of the people who worked for him. And they had picked up on that, and I still to this day don't know exactly how they found out some of the information they found out. But yeah, they started making threats, and I got the official, notification where federal law enforcement shows up and knocks at the door and says, "Hey, there's a viable threat against you. Someone's trying to hire people to harm you. You need to be careful. We've got eyes out there for you, but you need to be aware of this." And my family's home when this happens and everything else. There's no hiding it. And I mean, I'm the only good part about my job is that I am divorced and my kids don't live with me, so there's less of a threat to them. But I still have friends, I still have family, and there's people have to be aware of it. The neighbors see stuff going on, they want to know. It just affects you, but the amount, it gives you a lot of anxiety. I don't go anywhere ever without a gun, and that wasn't the case before. I mean, yeah, I used to work in law enforcement and I did once do undercover work and things like that, but my normal day life in doing cyber, that's not how I've felt. And now I never go anywhere unarmed. I'm unbelievably paranoid, but it's the weight on your shoulders. It's the anxiety, the paranoia. Not everybody can handle that, and you have to learn how
Hmm.
to handle that and use it to keep you safe and not let it tear you down. And if I didn't figure out how to do that, I wouldn't keep doing what I'm doing. But it's tough. It really is something that, mental health is a big thing. I go every 2 weeks and have for about 12 years now to talk to a therapist. I was there this morning. They think I have the craziest life. I tell them things that nobody else even knows, but it's like something out of a movie. But at the same time, it's real life. So you
Hmm.
have to be able to stomach it. And if you can't, you got to stop doing the work because you can't let it destroy you or your family or your relationships or take a toll on your health and things like that. All of those things happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. And I'm glad to hear you mention, mental health, and taking care of ourselves. That was a challenge, growing up in the agency, in the generation we did. Like, I remember when you didn't do that. You didn't, or at least you sure as hell didn't tell anybody. You'd lose your clearance,
Yeah, you
and it
couldn't
was,
tell anybody. That's right. That's
yeah,
right.
Yeah, to keep it to yourself. And
Oh,
if they ever found out, if you saw a therapist and they ever found out, you'd lose your clearance over it, and which was super dangerous. It just made people endure more things and possibly end up with poorer results, in their lives that could have been avoided if they just had somebody to talk to. But the thinking was if you needed help, then, you were flawed or broken or whatever.
yeah,
And obviously we've matured past that, I think, for the most part as a society, because you do have to talk to people. You have to unload some of this stuff and quantify this, some of the stuff and make sense of some of it. I'm not a bad person because I'm following bad people, and dealing with, like I said, with the far end of it. If they're mad at me now, and people can hurt you. I know lots of people who, at least at one point in time, have been on lists. I'm not as serious as yours, but once for myself. But yeah, like I said, you got to manage that, and then you got to manage it with everybody around you. As you said, your family was home when this happened. It's very hard
right.
to help other people be like, it's okay, it'll be okay, I think, and please don't run away from me as a result of this. But the work's just so meaningful, right? So I appreciate you
Yes.
sharing it. I know that's, that was when I
Can I
was
share
like,
one more thing
yeah,
there?
yeah, absolutely, man, anything you want.
You have to know how to channel that energy, as I mentioned. For
Hmm.
me, the way I channeled that is I went taking on those motherfuckers. I doubled down. At this point, I'm already at risk. I'm already threatened. I'm coming for you. And I know
Hmm.
that I'm not trying to sound like I'm all macho and other stuff, but I'm telling you that that's what got me through it. Is they came after me. I wanted to make sure they knew that I knew who they were. I wanted them to have so many problems that I was going to be the last thing they were worried about, and the world knew who they were as well. And I doubled down, and I told them that. I told them that I was coming. And
Yeah.
that was sort of the end of our relationship. But when that indictment came out, and minutes later I released a 30-page paper with where the guy lived, all his information. I mean, I had stuff I didn't even put in there. I had his door codes to his building. It was hard to not call him. I had his phone number long before
Hmm.
he was
Hmm.
indicted, and all that stuff. But that's what I did. I used that sort of anxiety, you know, I don't know what I guess you call it, yeah, fear, and and
Hmm.
and I used that to channel to a good purpose. I put on the Batman thing back there is funny. I'm like a half Boy Scout, half Batman. That's not necessarily who I really am, but in my work it is, because it's not that you have to be fearless. You have to be vulnerable, and understand your feelings, and understand how to channel them in a direction that's going to make it better. So not just sitting in your room and letting all this stuff eat you away, but
Hmm.
channeling that back and using it to motivate you to make them feel the way that they made you feel. And that's
Hmm.
exactly what I did, and what I continue to do when I find myself in these situations.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, and it's empowering, right? Like you said, you're already at risk. So, do I just stay in fear and cower, or do I say, okay, I'm at
Yeah.
risk, but I'm gonna make this difficult? Because eh, not always. I'm not going to encourage how people want to act in these situations, but sometimes that's enough. Like, people will back down sometimes if it's no longer worth it. It's the whole concept of, is the juice worth the squeeze? Hey, you're mad at me. I've outed you. I've damaged your business, or whatever. But if I can also inflict more pain if you bother me, maybe it's time to just pack it up and go on to the next. There's a long life. There's a lot of other people out there to victimize. There's a lot of things to do. Maybe this is no longer worth it. And criminals do tend to be a path of least resistance group. Yes, there's a code, and there's retribution for some things, etc. But criminals also, like successful ones, long-term successful ones, tend to be path of least resistance. There's a point where you just go, hey, it's just not worth it. The noise isn't worth it. The hassle's not worth it. I can be mad if I ever run into that person, whatever. But I'm not going to burn down my entire world over this. And if anybody feels like this could cause me a lot of harm or more trouble, there's a benefit of that. Now, for most people, I wouldn't recommend it. Most people don't have your skill set, but I get it. If you're already at risk anyway, just saying the hell with that. I'm gonna lean in. I'm gonna make it clear that this is
Yeah.
going to be painful, and then
I,
see if
I,
you still want to go.
I may not be able to kick your ass in a cage fight UFC style anymore. I'm 48 years old, but goddamn, I'll fuck you up with a keyboard.
There you go. I mean, I've had lesser experiences. You get the bar fight type of thing. Somebody gets mad and they're upset, and you just look at them and go, listen, you're going to win. You're bigger and stronger than me. Do you want to limp though? Like, you know, do you want the
Right.
pain it's going to take away? Yeah.
Right.
Listen, I've had those discussions. I'm like, clearly you're going to kick the shit out of me. There's no debate. You're big, you're strong, you're young, whatever. Do you want to limp? Do you want to have to get a tooth replaced? I'm going to take a piece of you. Is
Right.
this worth it to you? And if it is, let's go. I mean, you're going to kick the crap out of me, and I guess I'll deal with those consequences. But I will take a piece. And sometimes that's enough for somebody to go, yeah, it ain't worth it. I don't want to limp. I don't want whatever's going to happen, because reminding people you're going to inflict pain in return, and they go, yeah, maybe it's not worth it. please, if anybody runs into me at a bar, let's not challenge me to a fight. I'm not really interested in going down these paths. I'm not a tough guy either. I'm not advocating for somebody to go pick a fight with me or whatever. But
You can
yeah, but sometimes you just gotta, let people know. And I get it. Again, backed into a corner. Like you said, it's not about being macho or whatever. You didn't have a choice. You were already being threatened. You were already at risk. It's not like you went out of your way to say, I'm gonna go take on guys. It's not about being, fearless or foolish. It's about, the courage to try to defend yourself, and sometimes a little bit of offense, or at least showing the possibilities is a really good defense. So listen, we're running out of time. I could do this all day. You're fascinating, but I do want to get to the end of the show for everybody else who probably wants to do something else at some point. So let's close this one out. Like, the name of the show is Unspoken Security. And, with that in mind, I ask every guest the same question, and you don't get a pass either. And the question is, tell me something you've never told anyone, something that, so far has been unspoken.
I've been fired 5 times in my career. People see where I am today and make some assumptions. I've been fired quite a few times, struggled in my career. I've had, mental health struggles, dealing with things. That's why I'm a big advocate for it. Like you said, when we work for the government, you're not going to talk to a therapist. You're not able to do any of that type of thing. In the private sector, things get too stressed. I can light up a joint at the end of a day. You can't do that in those worlds. And but again, to answer your question, like I said, it's really tough. I've talked about one event where I had lost a job, which kind of set my path forward with writing a book. But yeah, even people think, oh, you're at the top of your game now, and you're doing so great. Well, I got here because I made a lot of mistakes, but I learned from them. And one of the biggest things I learned from those experiences was to put my ego aside, and then to take whatever was behind it. A lot of times I didn't agree with things that led to that, but you take that and you use it to make yourself better, and you use it to inspire yourself, and you use it to motivate yourself. The one that I have talked about publicly, I'm not going to say who the company was, and it's not on my resume, but when I was only there for like two months, and it was supposed to be one of the greatest jobs I could have gotten. And I was surrounded by really smart people. But I'm very creative. I'm not like scientific in the way I do things, and it didn't fit with their flow. And I remember they told me I couldn't write, and that I wasn't a good analyst. And it motivated me, and it's why it motivated me to prove that, to write a book, to be better at being a researcher or an analyst. But I had to put my ego aside with that, and not just be like, screw you guys, you know what you're talking about. I'm the greatest in the world. If I had done that, we wouldn't be sitting here talking today. So taking those and learning a little bit about yourself, feeding out what's not true, but actually being open to the fact that there's a reason that this happened. So some of it must be true, and trying to make yourself better. But, I got fired. It was in DOD early in my career. I got fired because I had taken a job. I was there a week. I got the flu. I was out a week. I came back. I had not met the program manager because he had been out that first week I was there. And I walked in, and this guy had his feet on my desk. I didn't know who he was.
Oh, no.
And when I was younger, I was into powerlifting. I'd come out of the military. I was all overly macho, if you will. I was a pretty angry dude. I had a rough upbringing, and I was angry about it. Anyway, this guy had his feet on my desk, and I'm like, and he's like, we don't call out sick here. And I'm like, who the fuck are you? Get your feet off my desk. And I pushed his feet off, and we started exchanging words. It literally ended with me putting the guy in a headlock in front of the government customer, everybody. I was escorted out by DOD. I was fired. Like, it was a whole thing. But people, I don't share those stories. I think now, but that doesn't make me cool. That showed that I allowed my emotions to get the best of me, and I ended up costing myself a job. I was an engineer back then. It wasn't like I had, the namesake that I have now, where it's easier for me to get a job. That was stupid. It took me a while to get another job. Ego, man. It's not worth it.
Yeah, I mean I was gonna say it's a great story. It's an amusing story. I don't know if it's a great story, but it's a great lesson, right? And I appreciate you saying that. I've had some amazing people on the show. You're right up there, obviously, and I always appreciate. Listen, anybody who gives anything at the end of this, I appreciate. But when it's somebody who reveals something like this, where you go, oh, like, okay, because we get to a point, I think, where we start putting some people on a pedestal, and you think, well, they're amazing and they're perfect, and I could never be as good as them, and whatever. And I've done this thing, so I could never overcome it. You're like, listen, most of us have some kind of junk in the past. It's sometimes it's what led us to be. I should say us, because I'm not in the category with you, frankly, but it's what leads people to be better sometimes, is to learn from that, or worse, it's how you react to it, right? But it can lead you to be better. It can lead you to find, how do I do this better next time? I could find humility, or find peace, or get some learnings out of it. Like, I've been fired. I don't know I probably do, but most people I know, I think, have been fired at least once. A lot of us have, it may not say that officially. It's, there was a mutual agreement.
Right.
Yeah, sure there was. It was a mutual agreement right after I was told I was no longer going to come in anymore. I agreed not to show up. Some of those happen, or it's a negotiated thing. You can choose to resign, or you're going to be let go, or, we'll give you a couple weeks to find something else to do, that kind of a thing. It's a nicer way of saying fired, but it is what it is, right? And everybody I know has run into that at some point. And so I appreciate you mentioning that, so that anybody who's watching, like, hey, listen, you can overcome all sorts of stuff. Just learn from it. Figure out what it is. If you're getting fired repeatedly because you're an asshole, stop being an asshole, or it'll keep happening. Sometimes you run into bad people and it happens too. But I appreciate you sharing that. It's for somebody who's done so much and is so well known now and is really one of the leaders in the industry, to say, hey man, I was far from perfect and I made some bad choices and learn from it and overcome. And it's a sign of just what kind of a person you are. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show, man. I've been wanting to have you on for a while, so I'm glad we were able to sort this out. You're fascinating. Your career is fascinating. I'd love to have you on again somewhere down the road. We'll see, what comes on as you publish more things. I'm sure I'll see you at some of the upcoming events and we'll get a chance to hang out. Is there any last words you want to say before I close this out?
Just remember, we're all people. Leave your ego at the door. Learn to learn what empathy is, and try to understand that the better that you understand people, whether they're your colleagues, whether they're criminals, whether it's your neighbor, the better human and the farther in life you're going to get. I truly believe that in a world where we have a lot of hate, a lot of bad things that happen out there, we just need to stop with that shit.
Good words, man. I agree. I can't add more to that, so I won't even try. I think those are strong and powerful words that people should take to heart. It's a tough world. So again, thanks for coming on the show. Thank you everybody for watching and listening. If you like this, please, leave feedback and subscribe and tell everybody. If you don't like this, shut up and go away. No, but tell people, and tell me if you don't like it, we'll make it better. But I really appreciate it. We need more followership and more sharing of this information so we can have more of these great conversations. I can get more people like Jon to come on and talk about such important, interesting conversations. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and shut her down for the day. I really appreciate y'all being here. This has been another episode of Unspoken Security.
That's a wrap for this episode of Unspoken Security. If you enjoyed this episode, follow us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. See you next time.